my anger, all my rage.
What made you kill her?
Hearing Tom sorry that I told her she was a lion. Just like all other women that could destroy my life.
Anthony Kirkland's story begins long before his crimes made headlines. Born on September 13, 1968, in Cincinnati, Ohio, Kirkland's early years remain shrouded in obscurity, but like many individuals who later commit horrific acts, there were signs, small, often overlooked clues, about the darkness that lay ahead. Raised in a turbulent environment, Kirkland's childhood wasn't filled with stability or comfort. Like many troubled individuals, his early years were marked by a pattern of isolation and experiences that may have been contributing factors to his later violence. Psychologists and criminologists have long debated what causes someone to become a killer, and while there is no single answer, Kirkland's life seems to suggest that a combination of difficult circumstances might have contributed to the monster he would eventually become. Growing up in a household that lacked both support and consistent structure, he faced early challenges that would shape his worldview and behaviors. However, it's important to remember that many individuals face hardship and grow up in similar environments without resorting to violence. By the time he reached adulthood, a pivotal moment in Kirkland's life had occurred. In 1987, at the age of 19, he committed his first known crime, the murder of his girlfriend, Leola Douglas. The violence of the crime was both shocking and brutal. He not only killed her, but also set her body on fire in a gruesome attempt to destroy any evidence. The horror of this act wasn't just in its brutality, but in the cold, methodical nature of it. This was no crime of passion. It was a crime of calculation, revealing the growing darkness inside him. After his arrest, Kirkland's history of violence and manipulation became clear. He pled guilty to manslaughter and served 16 years in prison. For many, a prison sentence is supposed to be a turning point, a chance for rehabilitation. But for Kirkland, it was merely a pause in his descent into deeper darkness. He would be released in 2004, with society unaware that the man who had once burned his girlfriend's body was ready to take more lives. What had started as a troubled youth full of potential for change now appeared to be a man hardened by his experiences, waiting for the right moment to strike again. In 1987, at the age of 19, Anthony Kirkland committed the act that would forever define his life. It wasn't his first brush with trouble, but it was the moment his path to becoming a serial killer truly began to take shape. His victim was his girlfriend, Leola Douglas, a 27-year-old woman who had been in a relationship with him for some time. By all accounts, their relationship was complicated, and it appeared that Kirkland's temper and violent tendencies were bubbling beneath the surface. On the fateful day in May 1987, something in Kirkland snapped. What exactly transpired that led him to murder Leola is not fully known, but the result was devastating. After killing her, he didn't stop there. He set her body on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. The violence of the crime was shocking, but perhaps what makes it even more chilling is the calculated way in which it was carried out. This was not a crime of passion. This was something much darker, a glimpse into the mind of a man who saw murder as a means to an end, a tool he could wield when he lost control. Kirkland's actions didn't just end Leola's life. They marked the beginning of a disturbing pattern. When he was arrested, the details of the crime were grimly clear. It was a horrifying glimpse into his psyche, one that would only deepen as the years went on. Despite the brutality of the crime, Kirkland pleaded guilty to manslaughter, a charge that would seem almost mild compared to the nature of the act. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison. For many, prison is a place of reckoning. It's where individuals are supposed to face the consequences of their actions and be given the chance to reflect, change, or find redemption. But for Anthony Kirkland, prison did not seem to serve as a moment of reflection. Instead, it may have been where his anger and violent tendencies only festered and grew. Inside the prison walls, he spent his years away from society. But the dark thoughts and desires that had driven him to murder in the first place were not erased by incarceration. If anything, the environment of prison may have hardened him even more. 16 years passed, and in 2004, Kirkland was released from prison. He had served his time and was ready to re-enter society. But the question that loomed over his release was haunting. What had changed in him during those years behind bars? Had he truly learned from the crime he had committed, or had he simply waited for the opportunity to strike again? When Anthony Kirkland was released from prison in 2004, society had no idea that the man who had been locked away for 16 years, convicted of murdering his girlfriend, was about to re-enter the world with an even darker purpose. The years he spent behind bars had done nothing to quell the rage that simmered within him. If anything, his time in prison seemed to have only intensified the darkness. What had been a singular, horrific crime in 1987 was about to evolve into a chilling spree of murder that would terrorize the city of Cincinnati for years to come. Upon his release, Kirkland was placed back into the community, under parole supervision. However, his return didn't come with the sense of redemption or remorse that one might hope for after such a violent past. Instead, it was as though he had been waiting for this moment, the moment when he could unleash his rage once again. There was no noticeable rehabilitation, no evidence that he had truly reflected on his actions or understood the gravity of his past. Kirkland, free from the confines of a prison cell, was now ready to begin what would be a horrifying series of murders. Within 2 years of his release, he committed his first murder in this new spree. It was March 2006 when Kirkland killed Cassandra Crawford, a 15-year-old girl. The brutality of this crime set the tone for the murders that would follow. Like his previous crime, there was an almost methodical approach to it. The violence was cold and calculated. Kirkland didn't act on impulse, but rather he seemed to be following a twisted plan, executing his crimes with the precision of someone who had been waiting for the right time to strike. By this time, a subtle fear began to creep through the streets of Cincinnati. The community was unaware that Kirkland, now free, was quietly plotting the deaths of more innocent people. His first victim, Cassandra, was followed by 2 other women that same year, Mary Jo Newton, aged 45, and Kimya Rollison, just 14. Each of these women was strangled. Each body was set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence, and each victim's life was violently snuffed out in the most horrific way. Yet, despite the pattern emerging, there was no immediate link between these deaths, and the killer remained on the loose. As the murders continued, the people of Cincinnati began to feel the weight of the fear that had been building in the city. A sense of dread settled in, and with each new victim the question loomed larger. Who was behind these killings? With little to go on, authorities were struggling to make a connection between the crimes, even as the death toll began to rise. Kirkland, it seemed, was growing bolder. He appeared to be getting away with it, moving through the city unnoticed while the police continued their search for clues that would lead them to him. What was even more chilling was his ability to blend back into society, to walk among the people he would eventually prey on, without arousing suspicion. How could someone so dangerous go unnoticed for so long? His evasion of the authorities in the early stages of the killings was both chilling and disturbing. It seemed that Kirkland, with his past of violence, had learned how to operate in the shadows, carefully concealing his true identity. The fear that gripped the city wasn't just about the brutal nature of the crimes. It was about the unsettling realization that the killer could be anyone. He could be your neighbor, your coworker, someone you passed on the street. The randomness of it only added to the terror. Yet as the days and months passed, the mounting pressure to solve the case continued to build. But Kirkland was far from finished. What was about to unfold would send shockwaves through the city and mark him forever as one of the most terrifying serial killers in American history. He had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, but his greatest and most chilling crime was still to come. Behind every crime there are lives lost, lives that are more than just statistics or tragic headlines. They were people with hopes, dreams, and futures that were stolen from them far too soon. The victims of Anthony Kirkland's killing spree were not just nameless faces in the news. They were individuals with stories, families, and communities who will never forget them. One of his first victims was Cassandra Crawford, a 15-year-old girl whose life ended in the most violent way imaginable. Cassandra, like many young girls, was filled with promise. She had a family who loved her and friends who cherished her bright personality. She had a future ahead of her, one full of opportunities, friendships, and experiences yet to be lived. But all of that came to a halt on the evening of March 6, 2006, when Kirkland ended her life. He abducted Cassandra, brutally murdered her, and left her body to be discovered days later. For her family, the pain was overwhelming. Cassandra's death marked the beginning of a series of killings that would shake Cincinnati to its core. Her family lost a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Her death was more than just an isolated tragedy. It was a painful sign of the horrors to come. Shortly after Cassandra, Mary Jo Newton, a 45-year-old woman, became Kirkland's next target. Mary Jo's life was full of ups and downs, but she was described by those who knew her as a kind, generous soul. She had children, a family, and a desire to live a peaceful life. Yet, on May 29, 2006, Mary Jo's life was taken from her in the most brutal way. She was found in a vacant lot, her body charred in an attempt to hide evidence. The terror of the situation hit not only her immediate family but also the wider community. Mary Jo was someone's mother, someone's sister, and her violent death left a wound that could never heal. For her family, the loss was immeasurable. They could never understand why someone would do this to her, and the fear that Kirkland had left in his wake haunted them for years. As if his spree hadn't already devastated enough lives, Kirkland's third victim, Kimya Rollison, would be another young life stolen in the most senseless of ways. Kimya was only 14 when she met her untimely death on June 13, 2006. A teenager just starting to explore the world, Kimya's life was cut short before she had the chance to truly live it. Her family described her as a vibrant, fun-loving girl who had a bright future ahead. She was loved deeply, and her death sent shockwaves through her community. Kimya's body, like those of the others, was left abandoned. In her case, it was in an area of Cincinnati that many considered safe. The discovery of her body, along with the other murders, spread fear throughout the area. The terror of Kirkland's spree was no longer confined to the families of the victims. It was spreading, leaving behind a city gripped by fear. The final victim in this horrific series was Esme Kenny, a 19-year-old woman, whose life ended on May 29, 2009. Esme was known to her friends and family as a kind-hearted and caring person. She had aspirations for her future and was someone who sought joy in the small moments of life. Unfortunately, her life was violently cut short when she became Kirkland's next target. Esme's death, like the others, was marked by brutality. She was found in a secluded area, her body discarded and left to be discovered by those who would grieve her loss. Her death was the culmination of the terror Kirkland had unleashed on the city, and the impact was felt deeply by her family, friends, and the broader community. What stands out about all of these victims is that they were more than just victims of a serial killer. They were people with dreams, families, and futures. They were beloved daughters, sisters, and friends. Their deaths were senseless, tragic, and violent, leaving behind an emotional scar on everyone who knew them. They were taken too soon, and their memories were forever marked by the brutality of their killer. Each life that was taken by Kirkland represents a life that was stolen from the world. It wasn't just one person who was affected by his crimes. It was entire families, entire communities that were changed forever. The victims' stories are not just a tragic chapter in this dark tale, they are the heart of it. Their loss is the painful reality that underscores the terror Kirkland unleashed, and it is their memory that reminds us of the horror he caused. We must not forget the real people behind the headlines, the mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers, whose worlds were shattered by the violent actions of one man. Their stories must live on, not just as reminders of a tragedy, but as a testament to their humanity. The arrest of Anthony Kirkland brought a mix of relief and uncertainty. The long hunt for the man responsible for a series of brutal murders had come to an end, but for many, the real question still loomed. Would justice be served? Kirkland's trial would become a chilling reminder of the horrors he inflicted, not only on his victims but on their families, who had to face the harsh reality of his crimes in a public forum. The trial was filled with emotional testimony as loved ones of the victims spoke about the lives lost, about daughters, sisters, and mothers whose futures had been stolen away. Their pain was palpable in the courtroom, a silent yet undeniable presence that weighed heavily on everyone present. As the evidence was presented, it was clear that the prosecution had a strong case. Kirkland was linked to each of the murders, through physical evidence including DNA and personal belongings found in his possession. The details of his crimes, his methodical and violent acts, were laid bare, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. The families of the victims, many of whom had lived in fear for years, watched as the reality of Kirkland's actions was confirmed by the facts presented in court. Yet it wasn't just the courtroom drama that made the trial so emotional. It was the faces of those who had been left behind, the victims' families who had suffered incomprehensible loss. Their reactions spoke volumes. Some were stoic, trying to maintain composure in the face of overwhelming grief. Others were visibly shaken, their pain still raw, even after all the time that had passed. They didn't just lose loved ones, they lost pieces of their own identities. The emptiness left by each murder echoed in the courtroom as their voices demanded justice. After deliberating on the evidence, the jury reached a verdict: guilty. The conviction was a hard-fought victory for the prosecution and, more importantly, for the families who had waited so long for this moment. But the true weight of the trial came when it was time for the sentencing. The question of whether Kirkland would receive the death penalty was at the forefront of everyone's mind. It was a decision that not only carried immense legal implications but emotional ones as well. Kirkland's crimes were brutal. The deaths were senseless. The public had seen enough. The courtroom was filled with tension as the judge delivered his decision: death by lethal injection. For many, it was a bittersweet moment. The justice system had done its job, but there was little comfort to be found in the death of a man who had taken so much from so many. The decision to sentence Kirkland to death was met with mixed reactions. While some saw it as the only fitting punishment for the horrific acts he had committed, others questioned whether the death penalty could ever truly provide the closure that families needed. Could it erase the pain? Could it bring back the lives that had been lost? The answer was, of course, no. But for the community, for the families, and for the victims, it was a form of justice, hard-earned and long-awaited. As the sentence was handed down, the families of the victims could only take comfort in knowing that, for the first time in years, they were no longer living in fear. But the scars left by Kirkland's crimes would last a lifetime. The memories of their loved ones could never be replaced, and no courtroom ruling could undo the damage done. The trial, conviction, and sentencing had brought an end to the legal battle, but the emotional aftermath would linger forever.
Please understand, though, I am not here to beg for mercy, nor your forgiveness. I am proof a young person deeply abused physically, emotionally, and mentally becomes the abuser. I do not blame you if you kill me. I do not deserve to live. But please spare my life.